The red warning lights had been flashing on mining colony Zeta 7 for 72 hours straight. In the control center, Administrator Vexhai watched his world fall apart one district at a time. The massive display screen showed the same horrifying scene playing out across his colony. Dark, writhing masses of creatures pouring to the streets like living nightmares. 12,000 Zalari civilians were trapped in emergency shelters, listening to the sounds of their homes being torn apart above them. The colony's defense grid had lasted exactly 14 minutes against the hive swarm. Now, all they could do was broadcast their desperate plea into the void and hope someone out there was listening. Mayday, Mayday. This is Mining Colony Zeta 7, requesting immediate evacuation assistance. We have 12,000 civilian refugees under siege by hive forces. Repeat, we need evacuation ships now. Vexhai's voice cracked as he spoke the same words he'd been saying for 3 days. His throat was raw, his hands shaking from too much stimulant and too little sleep. The hive wasn't like other threats the galaxy had faced. Pirates wanted your cargo. Slavers wanted your people. Territory wars were about resources and power. But the hive? They wanted everything. They consumed entire worlds, leaving nothing behind but empty husks floating in space. Whole star systems had gone silent after hive encounters, and the few survivors who'd escaped their initial attacks all told the same story. Creatures that moved like liquid shadow, ate through metal like it was soft fruit, and reproduced faster than anyone thought possible. The communication officer, a young Zalari named Kesare, looked up from her station with hollow eyes. "Sir, we're getting responses." For a moment, hope flickered in Vexhai's chest. Then he saw her expression. The Altera Defense Force says they're engaged with border conflicts and can't spare any ships. The Centauri Federation expresses their sympathy but lacks the firepower to engage hive forces. The Rigel Mining Consortium. She paused, reading. They say they're sorry for our loss. Our loss, as if they were already dead. 17 different species had received their distress call. 17 civilizations with faster-than-light travel, energy weapons, and military fleets. Every single one found an excuse to stay away. The hive had that effect on people. They were the boogeyman that made hardened space marines wake up in cold sweats. Nobody fought the hive and lived to tell about it. Well, almost nobody. The response came through at 0347 local time, from a system that wasn't even in their star charts. The communication officer nearly jumped out of her skin when her console chimed with an incoming transmission. "Sir, we're getting a response from Sol System? I've never heard of it." Vexhai leaned over her shoulder as she played the message. The voice was strange. Not the musical tones of the Alterians or the harmonic frequencies of the gas dwellers from Kepler 90. This was something different. Flat, direct, with an odd rhythm to it. Message received, Colony Zeta 7. Assistance is en route. Estimated arrival in 18 hours. That was it. No questions about their defensive capabilities. No requests for tactical information. No demands for payment or political concessions. Just a simple statement of fact delivered in that strange, clipped accent. Kesare looked confused. "Sir, they didn't ask about the threat level. They didn't even ask how many ships we need for evacuation." Vexhai stared at the communication logs. In all his years of colonial administration, he'd never heard of anyone responding to a hive attack with such calm certainty. Most species wouldn't even acknowledge receiving a distress call from a hive-infested system, let alone promise help. "Run a database search on this Sol system," he ordered. Minutes passed. Then Kesare shook her head. "Nothing, sir. No trade records, no diplomatic contacts, no exploration surveys. It's like they don't exist in our databases at all." Outside the control center, the sounds of destruction continued. The hive was getting closer to the emergency shelters. Vexhai could hear the civilians crying, could smell the fear scent that filled the recycled air. In 18 hours, it might all be over anyway. But something about that voice stuck with him. There had been no fear in it, no hesitation. Just two simple words that somehow carried more weight than all the elaborate apologies from the major powers combined. "We're coming!" As if the hive was just another problem to be solved. As if whatever lived in this whole system had dealt with worse things before. Vexhai found himself almost believing it, despite everything he knew about the creatures tearing his world apart. What kind of beings would hear about a hive attack and respond with such calm confidence? What did they know that the rest of the galaxy didn't? 18 hours later, Vexhai stood in the observation deck of the colony's central tower, watching the emptiness of space through reinforced windows. The hive had pushed deeper into the residential sectors during the night, and the sounds of destruction echoed through the corridors even here, 40 stories above the ground. He'd almost given up hope when the sensors detected something dropping out of hyperspace at the system's edge. The ship that appeared on his screens made him want to cry. After all that waiting, all that desperate hope, this was what had come to save them. One single vessel, barely 300 meters long, moving through space with the grace of a falling brick. It looked like something from a museum. Actual metal hull plating instead of living bio-armor, primitive chemical thrusters instead of gravity drives, and weapon systems that his colony's mining lasers could probably outgun. "Sir," Kessara called from her station, "the ship is requesting permission to dock at Base 7. "One ship," Vexhai muttered, watching the crude vessel lumber toward their station. They sent one ship against the hive, but there was something else bothering him as he watched their would-be rescuers approach. The ship moved wrong. Not clumsy exactly, but deliberate in a way that didn't match its primitive appearance, like it was being very careful not to show what it could really do. When the airlock sealed and the docking bay pressurized, Vexhai made his way down to meet their guests. He expected to find some desperate mercenaries, or maybe a small religious group with more courage than sense. What stepped out of that battered ship made his breath catch in his throat. They called themselves humans, and they looked like something evolution had designed specifically to give other species nightmares. Tall, bipedal creatures with pale skin stretched over dense muscle and bone. But it was their faces that made Vexhai take an involuntary step backward. Forward-facing eyes like every apex predator he'd ever studied. Set in faces that could express emotion, but somehow felt completely alien at the same time. The leader introduced himself as Captain Jake Morrison, and his voice carried that same flat accent from the radio transmission. He was built like a hunter, lean but powerful, with scars on his hand that spoke of a hard life. When he smiled, which he did often, it revealed rows of sharp white teeth that looked designed for tearing meat. "Administrator Vexhai, I presume?" Morrison extended a hand in what Vexhai assumed was some kind of greeting gesture. "Sorry we're late. Traffic was murder getting here." Traffic, as if he'd just driven across town, instead of crossing interstellar space, to face the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. Morrison's team was equally unsettling. They moved to the docking bay with a fluid coordination that reminded Vexhai of pack hunters he'd seen in nature documentaries. Each human seemed to know exactly where the others were at all times, without speaking or even looking at each other. Their equipment was as primitive-looking as their ship, but something about the way they handled it suggested hidden capabilities. "Captain Morrison," Vexhai began, trying to keep his voice steady, "I must warn you, we're facing hive forces. These aren't ordinary raiders. They've wiped out entire star systems. Perhaps you should reconsider." "Hive forces," Morrison interrupted, and his smile got wider. "Outstanding. We haven't seen any of those in months." The casual way he said it made Vexhai's skin crawl. Outstanding? As if the hive was good news. As if facing the galaxy's most feared predators was something to look forward to. Morrison gestured to one of his team members, a woman with the same predatory grace and unsettling smile. "Lieutenant Blake Rodriguez, our xenobiologist. She's been dying to study some live hive specimens." Rodriguez stepped forward, and Vexhai noticed she carried what looked like recording equipment alongside her weapons. "Captain, the initial scans are fascinating. These creatures show remarkable adaptation patterns. I'm seeing at least 6 distinct subspecies in the attack formations." She was talking about the monsters tearing apart his colony, like they were interesting animals in a zoo. Her eyes lit up with genuine excitement as she described their feeding patterns and reproductive cycles, taking notes on a primitive tablet device. "You're studying them?" Vexhai asked weakly. "Of course," Morrison replied, as if it was obvious. "Know your enemy, administrator. First rule of hunting." Hunting, not fighting, not surviving. Hunting. The human captain walked to the observation windows and looked out at the burning colony below. The hive creatures were visible even from this height, dark shapes moving through the streets like spilled oil. Morrison watched them with the same expression a chef might, while examining fresh ingredients. "Beautiful work," he murmured. "Look at that coordination. The way they're herding the civilians toward the central shelters. They're not just attacking randomly. They're preparing for something bigger." Vexhai stared at him in horror. "Captain, those are my people down there." Morrison turned, and for just a moment, Vexhai saw something in those forward-facing eyes that made his blood freeze. It was the look of something that had never been prey. Something that had spent its entire evolutionary history at the top of the food chain. "Don't worry, Administrator," Morrison said, that unsettling smile never wavering. "We'll take good care of them." Over the next few hours, Vexhai began to understand that these humans weren't like any species he'd ever encountered. While his people huddled in emergency shelters listening to the sounds of their world being destroyed, the humans set up equipment in the colony's command center and started asking the strangest questions he'd ever heard. "Tell me about their reproduction cycle," Lieutenant Rodriguez said, adjusting some kind of primitive recording device. "How quickly can a single hive unit spawn new offspring?" Vexhai stared at her in disbelief. "Lieutenant, we have 12,000 civilians trapped in shelters. Shouldn't we be discussing evacuation procedures?" Rodriguez looked genuinely confused by the question. "Evacuation? Why would we evacuate before we understand what we're dealing with?" She pulled up holographic displays of the hive creatures moving through the colony's outer districts. "Look at this coordination. They're not mindless monsters. There's intelligence here. Purpose." Captain Morrison leaned over the tactical display, studying the hive's movement patterns with intense focus. "Their herding behavior suggests pack hunting instincts." "Rodriguez, are you getting biometric data on their communication methods?" "Fascinating stuff, Captain," she replied, manipulating the recordings to zoom in on individual creatures. "They're using some kind of chemical marker system combined with subsonic vibrations. It's actually quite elegant." Elegant. She called the creatures that were systematically destroying his home elegant. Another human, Sergeant Tyler Walsh, was examining the colony's defensive systems with a critical eye. But instead of asking about weapons capabilities or shield generators, he wanted to know about the hive's attack patterns. Do they typically probe for weak points first, or do they go for overwhelming force right away? I don't understand why that matters," Vexhai said weakly. "They're already inside our defenses." "Oh, it matters plenty," Walsh replied with that same unsettling smile they all seemed to share. "Understanding their tactics tells us everything about their mindset. Are they opportunists or methodical planners? Do they adapt to resistance or stick to proven strategies?" The questions kept coming, each one more bewildering than the last. How did the hive creatures respond to different environmental conditions? Did they show preferences for certain types of prey? What were their energy requirements? Did they retreat when faced with superior force, or fight to the death? It was like watching scientists study animals in their natural habitat, except the animals in question were busy killing his people. "Captain Morrison," Vexhai finally said, his voice rising with desperation, "when exactly does the rescue operation begin? Our people can't hold out much longer in those shelters." Morrison looked up from the display screen where he'd been tracking individual hive units through the colony security network. His expression was patient, almost pitying, like a teacher dealing with a slow student. "Administrator, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We didn't come here to run away from these things." "Then what are you here for?" Vexhai demanded. Rodriguez answered without looking up from her recordings. "Research, primarily. We've been tracking hive movements across this sector for months, trying to understand their expansion patterns. This is the first time we've had a chance to observe them in active hunting mode. Observe them while people died. You're watching them like they're some kind of nature documentary," Vexhai said, horrified. "Pretty much, yeah," Walsh agreed cheerfully, "though documentary work is usually safer than this." Morrison walked to the command center's main view screen, which showed a live feed from the colony's surface. The hive creatures moved through the streets in coordinated waves, their dark forms flowing around obstacles with liquid grace. Instead of looking horrified or concerned, the human captain's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "Beautiful," he murmured. "Look at that formation. They're not just attacking, they're problem-solving. See how they adapted when they hit that reinforced section? 3 different approaches in under a minute." Vexhai felt his world spinning. "Captain, those things are killing my people." "Not yet, they're not," Morrison replied calmly. "They're positioning for something bigger. Classic hive behavior. Isolate the prey, study their defensive patterns, then move in for final phase." "Final phase?" Vexhai's voice cracked. "Mass consumption," Rodriguez said matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "They'll breach those shelters in about 6 hours, give or take. Right now, they're just making sure nothing escapes." The casual way she delivered this death sentence made Vexhai's legs nearly give out. "Then we have to evacuate now. Get everyone to the ships." "Administrator," Morrison interrupted, turning from the view screen with that predatory smile. "I think you're misunderstanding our purpose here." "Then explain it to me," Vexhai begged. Morrison exchanged glances with his team. Rodriguez grinned and packed away her recording equipment. Walsh started checking his weapons with practiced efficiency. The captain's smile grew wider, showing those sharp white teeth. "We didn't come here to rescue anyone, Administrator. We came here to hunt." The word hung in the air like a physical thing. Hunt. Not fight, not defend, not evacuate. Hunt. "The hive thinks they're at the top of the food chain," Morrison continued, his voice dropping to something almost conversational. "And they are most places, but they've never met humans before." Vexhai stared at them in growing horror. "You gonna fight them?" "Fight!" Morrison laughed, a sound that made Vexhai's skin crawl. "Administrator, you don't fight the hive. You hunt them. And lucky for your people, hunting is what humans do best." What happened in the next 24 hours changed everything Vexhai thought he knew about predators and prey. The humans didn't charge into battle like the heroic warriors from ancient stories. They didn't even act like they were going to war. Instead, they prepared with the methodical patience of craftsmen getting ready for a day's work. Captain Morrison gathered his team in the command center and spread out what looked like architectural blueprints of the colony. But these weren't the standard layouts Vexhai recognized. These maps showed things that shouldn't have been possible: air circulation patterns, structural weak points, even electrical conduit paths that ran behind the walls. "How did you get these?" Vexhai asked, staring at the detailed schematics. "We made them," Rodriguez replied, not looking up from her tablet, where she was analyzing hive movement data. 3 hours of passive scans while we talked. Your colony's pretty standard design. We've seen similar layouts on 12 other worlds. 12 other worlds. How many places had these humans been? Morrison pointed to various locations on the map with casual precision. "Walsh, you take the eastern residential blocks. Rodriguez, the industrial sector. I'll handle the Central Plaza area." He looked up at his team with that disturbing smile. "Remember, we're not trying to save the colony. We're studying how they hunt." "Understood, Captain," Walsh said, checking his equipment one final time. "What about extraction protocols if things go sideways?" "Things won't go sideways," Morrison replied with absolute certainty. "These creatures have been bullying civilizations that never learned to fight back. Time to show them what actual predators look like." Vexhai watched in growing amazement as the humans disappeared into the colony's lower levels. They didn't move like soldiers or warriors. They moved like hunters who had done this exact thing countless times before. Within minutes, his security monitors lost track of them completely. The first sign that something had changed came through the emergency communication channels. The panicked reports from the shelters started shifting from pure terror to confused hope. "Command, this is Shelter 7. Came a trembling voice over the comm. "The creatures outside, they're not trying to get in anymore. They're making these strange sounds, like they're afraid of something." "Afraid?" Vexhai looked at the security feeds, but the cameras in that sector had been destroyed hours ago. Then Rodriguez's voice came through on a human frequency that somehow bypassed all their security protocols. Contact, Eastern Section. Hive cluster of approximately 40 units. They're exhibiting defensive posturing. Defensive? Morrison's voice was calm, almost bored. From the Hive? That's new. Not anymore. Walsh chimed in from his position. They're trying to group up instead of spreading out to hunt. Classic fear response. Vex High watched his tactical display in disbelief as the Hive formations began to change. For days, the creatures had moved through his colony with absolute confidence, flowing around obstacles and coordinating their attacks with terrifying efficiency. Now their movement patterns were becoming erratic, defensive. "What's happening out there?" he demanded into his communicator. "We're teaching them about the food chain," came Morrison's reply. "Turns out they're not as tough as advertised when something fights back intelligently." Over the next few hours, the sound from outside began to change. Instead of the confident, predatory noises the Hive had been making, Vex High heard something he'd never expected. Sounds of confusion, distress, even what seemed like fear. The reports from his people in the shelters painted an incredible picture. The Hive creatures were abandoning their positions, retreating from areas they'd already secured, and most shocking of all, they were avoiding certain sections of the colony entirely. Shelter 12 reporting. Came another transmission. The creatures that were trying to break through our doors just left. All of them. They're heading toward the spaceport, like something's chasing them. Something was chasing them. 3 humans with primitive weapons, and an understanding of warfare that the Hive had never encountered. Captain Morrison. Vex High called over the comm, "What's your status?" "Educational," came the reply. "These things are used to overwhelming prey through numbers and fear. They've never faced anything that actually hunted them back." Rodriguez's voice joined the conversation. "The psychological impact is remarkable. Once we disrupted a few of their coordination groups, their entire tactical structure began falling apart. It's like they don't know how to handle actual resistance," Walsh added. "They're apex predators on worlds full of prey animals, but they've never dealt with other apex predators before. The tactical display showed something that no one in the sector thought possible. The Hive forces were consolidating into defensive positions instead of attacking. More importantly, they were moving toward the edges of colony, away from populated areas." "Are they retreating?" Kessler asked, staring at her scanner readings. "Impossible," Vex High muttered. "The Hive doesn't retreat. They've never retreated." But the evidence was right there on his screens. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the Hive was backing down. These creatures that had terrorized entire star systems were being systematically outmaneuvered by 3 humans with a better understanding of how predators really worked. Morrison's voice came through the comm one more time, carrying that same casual tone he'd used to discuss the weather. "Administrator, you might want to tell your people to stay in the shelters for another few hours. We're almost done here, but things might get a bit loud while we finish our work." Finish their work. As if dismantling the galaxy's most feared predators was just another day at the office. Outside, the sounds of the Hive grew more desperate, more frightened. For the first time since this nightmare began, Vex High allowed himself to hope. By the end of the second day, something unprecedented happened across mining colony Zeta 7. For the first time in 72 hours, complete silence fell over the residential sectors. No sounds of destruction, no terrifying calls from the Hive creatures, no screams from the remaining automated defense systems as they finally gave up their futile resistance. The silence was almost worse than the noise had been. Vex High stood in his command center, staring at displays that showed empty streets and abandoned Hive positions. His people were still huddled in their emergency shelters, too afraid to believe that the nightmare might actually be over. The last confirmed sighting of any Hive creature had been 6 hours ago, near the spaceport, and even those had been fleeing rather than hunting. "Sir," Kessler called from her monitoring station, "I'm picking up movement in the upper atmosphere. Multiple contacts heading for orbit." Vex High's blood ran cold. "More Hive ships incoming?" "No, sir," she replied, adjusting her scanners. I think these are the remaining Hive forces. They're leaving the planet." Leaving. The word didn't make sense in the context of the hive. They didn't leave. They consumed everything and moved on only when nothing remained. But the evidence was right there on his screens. Dark bioships rising from the planet's surface like fleeing animals. Their organic hulls scarred and damaged in ways that shouldn't have been possible. What came next defied everything the galaxy knew about hive behavior. The human ship, that primitive-looking vessel that had seemed so inadequate just days before, lifted off in the colony's docking bay and followed the fleeing bioships into space. But it didn't stop at the edge of the system. It didn't pause to regroup or call for reinforcements. It just kept hunting. For 3 days, Vex-High's long-range sensors tracked the impossible chase happening in the void above them. The hive bioships, creatures of living metal and adaptive tissue that could survive in hard vacuum and regenerate from catastrophic damage, were being hunted through space by a single human vessel that looked like it belonged in a museum. The readings made no sense. The hive ships were faster, more maneuverable, and had weapons that could crack planets. The human ship should have been destroyed in the first few minutes of engagement. Instead, it systematically tracked down every fleeing bioship with the patience of something that had all the time in the world. How are they doing this? Kesare asked, watching another hive bioship disappear from their sensors. Our databases say human technology is centuries behind galactic standards. Vex-High had been wondering the same thing, but as he watched the methodical destruction of the hive fleet, he began to understand that maybe the galaxy's databases were missing something important. Maybe technology wasn't everything. Maybe there were other kinds of advancement that couldn't be measured in weapons output or faster-than-light capabilities. On the 3rd day, Captain Morrison returned. He walked back into Command Center like he'd just finished a routine patrol, instead of hunting the galaxy's most feared predators through interstellar space. His uniform was clean, his equipment properly stowed, and that unsettling smile was sharper than ever. "Administrator," he said with a casual nod. "Sorry about the delay. Had to make sure we got them all." "All?" Vex-High asked weakly. "Every last bioship in the system," Morrison confirmed. "Can't have them regrouping somewhere and trying this again. The hive learns from every encounter, so you have to be thorough." Rodriguez appeared beside him, carrying data tablets and looking pleased with herself. "Remarkable specimens," she said. "We gathered enough behavioral data to update our entire tactical database. This should help with the next colony that calls for assistance." The next colony. As if hive attacks were just routine maintenance calls. "Captain Morrison," Vex-High began, "my people want to thank you. You've saved 12,000 lives. We can't possibly repay." "No payment necessary," Morrison interrupted. "We got what we came for," which was... Morrison's smile grew wider, showing those predatory teeth. "Experience, data, understanding." He paused, looking out at the colony through the observation windows. "The hive won't be coming back to this sector, Administrator. Word travels fast among their kind. They'll find easier prey elsewhere." Easier prey. The phrase stuck with Vex-High as he watched the human ship prepare to depart. As he looked back at everything that had happened, a terrible understanding began to dawn. The distress signal they'd sent out had been a call for rescue. It had been something else entirely. They'd advertised the presence of the galaxy's most dangerous predators, and Earth had responded not with salvation, but with something even more dangerous. The galaxy had spent centuries running from monsters, developing faster ships and stronger weapons and better hiding places. But somewhere out there, on a small planet in an uncharted system, evolution had taken a different approach. Instead of creating better prey, it had crafted better hunters. As the human ship disappeared into hyperspace, Vex-High finally understood what they'd encountered. The hive thought they were apex predators because they'd never met the real apex predators of the galaxy. They'd never met humans. The galaxy's most feared monsters had just learned they weren't at the top of the food chain after all. They'd just met something hungrier, smarter, and infinitely more patient than themselves. Something that didn't run from monsters. Something that hunted them instead.